If you want to disable the history buffer for any reason, you can do so with the no history command or in exec mode using the terminal no history command. In configuration mode, you'll issue this command no history under the line. If you want to completely disable the history buffer from configuration mode, you would have to go under each line. So you'd have to go under the console line, the VTY lines, the auxiliary line, and issue the no history command. Here we've just done it under the console line. We break out and we're actually logged in via the console line. So if we do a show terminal include history, we can see history is disabled. I had mentioned earlier that you could use a lowercase or uppercase h. Not getting into the include command too much here, but it is case sensitive. So in this situation, you would see that you do want the uppercase h. I would just use that for your verification command, because normally it's going to say over here, I can't remember what the verbiage is, but it would have history lowercase. If you did a lowercase here, you wouldn't even catch this. History with a capital H does not equal history with a lowercase h according to this, but I digress. So this next note says you cannot override the history buffer setting in exec mode if the buffer is disabled in the configuration. That's not quite true. What you can't do is set a history size if the history is disabled in the under the line rather. So in this case, we've disabled history under the console line. We're logged in on the console line. We tried to change the history size to 69 and we can see that it does not take because history is disabled. The bad part about this, and we'll see this I think in the next slide, is that you can actually override the entire no history. So you could issue terminal history here and override this no history. So you don't get a lot of control from the configuration under the lines, but that's, I think, a story for the next slide. So basically just clearing this up is that you can't set a size. You can re-enable this, but setting a size will not override it. So to disable it from exec mode, again, it's terminal no history, and you can see same result, it's disabled. One other way of sort of disabling the history buffer is to simply set the buffer to 0. Technically, history is still enabled, but effectively it's not going to work because you have a history size of 0. You can do that from configuration mode with the history size 0 under the lines, and then from the exec mode with the terminal history size 0. And you can see when you do our verification, history is enabled, but the history size is 0. So if you issue the show history, you won't get anything. There may be occasions where you simply want to set the history buffer back to the default value. Again, Cisco documentation says this default value is 10 lines. The router that I'm using for this example, it's actually 20. But you could do that from configuration mode with the no history size command under the line. So in this case, under console line, we're saying no history size. And prior to this, we had a history size of, I believe, 100. So when we go ahead and issue our verification command, we can see it's set to 20, which actually is a default. So it just blew away the history size and set it back to the default. So it's a little confusing here. You're not disabling the history size, you're just basically defaulting it. And then you could do the same thing from exec mode. In this case, we've set the size to 69. Here we verified it, and then we issue the terminal no history size, which is just an odd looking command, and we're back to 20. Validation commands, there's really only one official validation command, and that is the show history command itself. So if you're getting output from this, then obviously history is working. In this case, you can see that we're doing this from exec mode. It doesn't show you with this command what the history size is, though. It's just going to go ahead and give you the history buffer. What we've shown in previous slides, and we're officially introducing it here, I guess, is that the history parameters are in the terminal output. So show terminal, and then you could just parse through that to find the history settings. Like I said, you can use the include, that's what the I is, and then history, use the uppercase H. So if it's disabled, it'll say history is disabled. In this case, history is enabled, and you can see when it's enabled, it'll also tell you what the history size is, and in this case, it is 20. As we've seen, all of the history buffer commands can be issued either from exec mode or configuration mode. Really, kind of in this situation, exec mode is actually a better way to do it, because we've seen that in exec mode, you can override the configurations in configuration mode. Plus, in configuration mode, you have to tie it down to specific lines, whereas in exec mode, it's only going to affect the TTY session that you're currently in. Probably the only big benefit of doing it in configuration mode is the permanence of the command. So if you reload the router and you would set your history size to 25 on your console line, when it comes back up, that's going to be reset to 25. Whereas in exec mode, you're not going to have that permanence. So if it reloads and you had done a terminal history size of 256, it'll come back with either the default or what's in the configuration for your particular TTY line. Anyways, we've gone over all these. This table is just a nice wrap up. Show history all. So when I was going through this on the command line, I saw the option for show history. I also saw an option for show history all, which is very sparsely, if at all, documented by Cisco. And I'm just making you aware of this. I'm probably going to do a video on this. I want to research this a little bit more. But this is a potentially very useful and potentially very dangerous command. If you issue this, and again, this might be depending on the Cisco iOS version and or platform that you're running, whether this is present at all. This is heavily truncated. It will show you the commands, even like your screw ups. Like you can see here, I had started with show running configuration enter and hadn't completed my command, and it's got a timestamp on it. It shows you that, you know, wow, it took me 6 seconds to get the right command in there, and it shows a full command. So it's showing you everything. And if I see it here, show terminal, well, it doesn't show me going into configuration, but you can see here I've got exec commands and I've also got configuration commands here. So it's basically giving you everything, and we'll see, I believe, in the next slide. The big problem is that you can get into this from privilege level 1 and you can see other users' command history. It does mask passwords. I have seen the output for that it does mask passwords, but we're not going to go real deep into this. I just want you to be aware that this may exist on your routers, and this could be a security issue. You may want to follow up with Cisco on this. Okay, yeah, you can see here show history, then utilizing iOS help all. It says display the full command history as in crash info. So crash info is something that Cisco generally collects when your router goes kaput, and they'll put that into a parser, look through it, and it has a ton of information in there. This might be something that's not supposed to be in iOS. It's a debug command that shouldn't be there. I don't know. Again, I looked fairly closely for documentation of this command. I did not see anything. But in this paragraph here, we'll see this on the CLI a little bit. Again, I don't want to go too deep in there into this. That I was able to, in privilege level 1, see commands issued by other users. You know, users that had logged in via VTY with level 15 privileges. I saw all of their commands, whether it was exec level commands or configuration level commands. It seems like this could be a little bit of a security issue. I suppose more importantly, making you aware of it's great, but also I couldn't find a way to either clear it or disable it. So, alright, that's enough for show history all. So in summary, the command history buffer is a very useful Cisco iOS feature. Like I said, most of us probably used it without knowing that we're using it via the up arrow or control P or down arrow control N, blah blah blah. By default, Cisco iOS maintains the last 10 commands that you have issued, and it uses a separate list of 10 commands for each the exec and configuration mode. Again, I'm not going to bait the 10 commands. We'll see that that is different on the router that I'm using today. And you can change the number of commands in the buffer, either via the exec mode or via configuration mode. So that's it for the quote-unquote theory portion. Let's go ahead and jump on the CLI and see this in action.